Manaforge Omega is practically wrapped, and this is my honest tier review. I'm going boss by boss, breaking down what worked, what didn't, and what I'd change next tier. Let's get into it. To give a bit of context, I raid in Death Jesters. We raid a whopping total of 6 hours a week, 3 on Friday and 3 on Saturday. And we raid late. I usually head to sleep around 12:30 in the morning on raid nights. We normally finish the tier somewhere between US 150th to US 180th, give or take. Most of us have families and our playtime is somewhat limited. We really have to make the most of this limited time, so doing this type of review really helps me personally take stock of the areas I need to focus on. Let's get into the bosses. Plexus Sentinel is up first. For a first boss, this one actually rocked. While it was simple in design, it had enough going on to keep you engaged. We only had 8 pulls on this boss, so prog time was limited here. Unfortunately, on our kill, I made the mistake of locking myself out of using the extra action button and got atomized by a wall. If I would have taken my time and just waited, I would have been safe, but I got greedy. Repeat kills on this boss were mostly fine, but I did get atomized again twice. Both times I just zone out and forget a wall was coming. I think part of this problem is I'm playing top down with my camera, so I don't notice the wall until it's too late at times. And I don't really have weak aura tracking of when the wall is going to cross the line, so visually, I think for me it was a bit hard to see. Parsing on this boss has been difficult. Our kill times here have been pretty crap, and we really need to kill the boss before we have another intermission phase. While my results are good, they could be even better. Looking towards next tier, I need to focus on playing safer during progression and sometimes not optimize every global. That got me into trouble here, and if I'm able to avoid doing that in the future, I'll be in a good spot. Moving on to Soulbinder Naazindhri. This boss wasn't my favorite. We killed it on our second pull and just moved on. I suppose it was fine for a second boss, but the ads just melted. For what should have been an AoE or cleave fight, the additional enemies just didn't last long enough. For Retribution, we were in a place where we had to sort of split the difference between AoE and single target, but our AoE wasn't super impactful here, and because the ads only came up for very short moments of time, the best play was probably just to take single target talents. Parsing on this boss really came down to how much damage you could do during that 2-minute ad spawn. Everyone in your raid is just nuking down those ethereals, and Retribution doesn't have as much burst AoE as some other classes, so you're really competing for who can do the most in a very short window. We weren't the best at that. I wish there was something more to say here, but this was an incredibly forgettable encounter. I don't have any notes for next tier here, so let's move on. Loom'ithar is up next. This one, I've enjoyed every time we've killed this boss. For Retribution, we really did just sit on the boss and never swap to the webs, but the damage amplification and phase transition at sub 50% health was pretty fun. Death Jesters killed this encounter on our 14th pull, and I regrettably died on our kill. I lost focus for a brief moment and didn't pay attention to a circle under me. My brain just didn't recognize that my old circle went away and a new circle was below me. Really a bummer, but you know what? It happens. So, I really took note of that overlap in phase 2, and I did make sure it didn't happen again during farm. Parsing on this fight has been pretty good, our kill times have been mostly favorable, and I've been fortunate enough to high roll with Streams of the Forgotten Sky a few times. I did like running that trinket here because of the damage amplification from 50% onwards. I found I got more value than I probably should have for it. For next tier, I need to pay special attention to fights that do have similar visuals. If I can recognize that a visual might be problematic, that's the first step to not dying from it repeatedly. Forgeweaver Araz was a top contender for one of my favorite bosses in Manaforge Omega. This fight had a recipe for success. It had well-defined phases, critical ad spawns that actually lived long enough, had some fun dodging mechanics, and a big damage amp. The only downside for me was that the last phase was too short. It should have been an epic race to the finish, but in reality, once you got into the last phase, Araz just fell over. We wrapped up Araz in a total of 53 pulls, and overall my plan progression was solid. I made a few mistakes, mostly getting clipped by orbs a few times, but when I played safe, I was fine. I had to really recognize that the orb dodge mechanic was the place I was going to die. So I had to play extra safe to make sure that didn't happen. Parsing for this fight has been a pretty crap experience. For a while there, we were still doing 2 intermission phases, and so I leaned more into single target optimization. After Dimensius was killed, I moved my cooldowns to the 30-second mark and began to see much better results. It is still really unfun when you get the ad drop mechanic though. Having to run behind a portal and have some downtime can really throw a wrench in your cooldowns. Like many of the previous bosses, the big takeaway for next tier is to identify what is going to kill me early and then make a conscious decision to play safely. Damage output mostly doesn't matter during early progression, but living as long as possible definitely does. The more time you spend alive and see the boss, the better your progression's gonna be. So we did Fractillus in a total of 8 pulls. This was a loot pinata of an encounter, and there's not much to say here other than you follow your weak aura and you press your defenses when you have the circle debuff. My defensive use was acceptable, but I could have probably used Shield of Vengeance a little bit more effectively, less on the wall breaks and more with the circle debuff. Parsing here has been incredibly frustrating. You have no control over the amount of debuffs you get, and usually you're always going to have one wall happen during a cooldown set. And it feels really bad to get yanked off the boss for a couple seconds when you're in major cooldowns. And that's uncontrollable. Really, you're just hoping to get as few wall breaks as possible, and if you do that, your damage is going to be much better. And I mean, I don't find that particularly fun or engaging. I like to have as much control as I can about how I do my damage and really try to optimize it, but on this fight, you're just doing your rotation, and sometimes you get forced off the boss. No notes for next tier here. Soul Hunters was one of my least favorite bosses in Manaforge Omega. I'd love to know what your least favorite boss in Manaforge Omega was. Go ahead and comment below. I usually can't stand council bosses, and this was not the exception. More often than not, there are a ton of mechanics and many of them just aren't meaningful. Also, it's a lot of spell clutter. Spells are everywhere, the visibility is poor. Being in melee, you're just in a stack of people and it's very hard to see. Any fight that has that type of clutter just automatically makes my experience worse. We ended up killing Soul Hunters in 43 pulls, but it felt like an eternity for some reason. If I remember correctly, I think we were pretty close to a kill around pull 20 or so, and then just spent the next 20 plus pulls messing around and having stupid deaths. That's really not a fun experience for progression. But Retribution was fairly well suited for the encounter, and I think my play was pretty solid. I made very few mistakes during progress, and my farm here has also been very consistent. I do want to note we did have some tank turnover in the middle of this tier, and we really, I believe, went through 3 or 4 tanks, and I've definitely noticed the change. Our boss stack isn't as tight, which is incredibly bad for cleaving both Hammer of Light and the splash from Empyrean Hammers. My parses have been relatively good, but I feel a lot of it just depends on how well the bosses have been stacked. For next tier, the lesson learned here is that I need to focus on what matters. If a mechanic isn't important to me and it won't kill me, I need to just ignore it. Less is more in this case. I mean, during progress here, my bigwigs alerts were going crazy, so I really had to dial it back, turn almost all of them off, and just focus on playing the game. My favorite encounter of the bunch is what's next up. Nexus-King Salhadaar fell over in a total of 164 attempts. I think what did it for me on this boss was the pacing of Phase 1. You really have to have eyes in all directions to not get beamed, and I found the ghost mechanic to be surprisingly fun. Outside of the Delve Kaiveza encounter, we haven't had a boss that required camera movements like this, ever. And when we get new and unique mechanics, it scratches an itch for me, and I love learning new things. The downside is Retribution was not well suited for this fight. We're traditionally weak on 2 targets, and our 30-second cooldowns weren't great during the damage amplification phase. Even saying that, this fight was a blast. I did really apply some of the lessons learned on earlier bosses here, specifically the 3 ghost set. Yet again, if I was going to die, this was going to be where it happened. I found that peeling off the boss for a moment during that 3rd ghost set really made the difference. By backing up a little bit, I opened up the encounter space and I was always able to see the triple ghosts and not mess up that mechanic. I landed a rank 1 on our first kill, which was pretty rad, and parsing has been mostly good here. The The ads during the platforms really melt now, so my second cooldown set's a bit botched there, but that's going to happen as farm goes on. I did have one sloppy death because I missed a ghost 1 week during farm, but for the most part, I've been really consistent and I've been really happy with this boss. So, on to the last one. I have a hot take for Dimensius, and you may or may not agree with me, but here it is. Dimensius is my least favorite boss in Manaforge Omega. Let me get on my soapbox and tell you why. Dimensius is so freaking big. While this wouldn't be a major issue normally, the size of his model causes some pretty bad visibility issues for melee. Every single time he swings his big chunky arms, it covers the melee play space. This often overlapped with key mechanics that required you to see the platform, specifically the circle soaking. And yeah, I played around it, it wasn't that big of a deal, but I prefer to play the game, not play position the camera. Continuing the visibility trend, the inverse and reverse gravity mechanics are terrible. It's a bunch of purple circles inside a purple circle on a purple platform. On top of that, you either had Artosian or Pargos sitting right on top of you in melee. You just couldn't see anything, and it's really hard to position yourself when you can't see anything. Oh, and on top of that, during the dragon riding phase, you have 19 other players flapping their giant dragon wings in your face. If you're at the front of the pack, like I was most of the time, it wasn't a big issue, but anytime you ever fell behind a little bit, you couldn't see anything. I've never died to this, but it certainly isn't a visually appealing part of the encounter. Not related to visibility, but in Phase 1, if you got knocked airborne, you were just permanently CC'd for many seconds. You can't cast anything, and that feels terrible. I just want to press my buttons, and he's still in range. This mechanic would have been so much better if you could have actually have done damage, but no, you're just CC'd and you're entirely dependent on your raid doing the mechanic properly. Not very fun. My last problem with Dimensius was that the damage also didn't really matter in both Phase 1 and Phase 2. You wanted to push the boss at a certain time to make sure cooldowns properly aligned, so there were moments when we would just stop or hold DPS, at least during early progression. Any encounter that makes me stop DPSing is immediately less fun. But with all of that said, I think Phase 3 Dimensius was incredible. It was fairly rote, but I love the rotational movement and gravity pulls. The play space kept getting smaller and smaller, and it was a fun challenge. We killed Dimensius in a total of 173 pulls, and honestly, my performance on this boss was really good. I do find that I tend to do very well on final bosses. On these longer bosses, I'm really able to get in a groove and optimize my moment-to-moment play. Because you might have 100, 200, 300 pulls, or whatever the count is on end bosses, it really gives you an opportunity to perfect the fight. But that doesn't mean I played perfectly during progress. I did make a few stupid mistakes on one of our progression nights. I was a little bit overtired and I made some silly mistakes. I repeatedly ran into the center mass of the Void Wardens 3 times, like back to back to back, and I'm thinking, what the heck is going on here? When I reviewed my footage, I was just cutting it too close to the edge, and I had the Void Warden nameplate still turned on. Once I turned them off, visibility, at least for that mechanic, was no longer a concern, and I didn't have any issues. It was just a simple fix, and I really just should have focused on what I was doing. Parsing on this fight has been a fun challenge. During progress, I wasn't really fully aligning my cooldowns with the Void Warden sets. I don't necessarily think this was a mistake at the time. We were really optimizing our cooldowns in P2 to be able to consistently get into Phase 3. So I was being more of a team player, but now that Dimensius has been dead, I did need to change things up. Saying that, I shifted my cooldowns on the platforms to more appropriate timings, and I started putting out major damage in P2. All I did was I aligned them with the Void Warden spawns and just kept on chugging. The big takeaway from this encounter is very similar to the lessons from Soul Hunters. Less is more. I really needed to focus on what impacted me and me alone and ignore the rest. If it didn't impact me, I don't really need to care. Overall, I think I met my expectations for this tier. I performed better than expected on some bosses, but I also made easily avoidable mistakes. When I started off this tier, dying on Plexus and then dying again on Loom'ithar, I was thinking, crap, this is not going well. But I was able to refocus and really make sure that the remainder of the bosses I performed well on. Sometimes just a bit of course correction can go a long way. So now, the War Within's at a close. Void Spire, Dream Rift, and March on Kel'Thuzad are just a few months away. So here are the lessons that I'm going to be applying next year and ideally through the rest of Midnight. Lesson 1. Play safe during progress. The most valuable time in progress is when everyone's alive. Getting further in the fight is more and more important than optimizing everything. There's always going to be time to optimize your damage or button presses, but the most important thing is always going to be living. Lesson 2. Focus on what can actually kill you. Some raid fights can have a lot going on, and guess what? A lot of that is just noise. If you can focus on the deadly things, and only on the deadly things, you're going to have a higher chance of success. Lesson number 3. Identify similar deadly visuals. So if an encounter has similar deadly visuals, I need to take note of when they might overlap. If it just happens and there's no overlap, it's not a problem, but the problem is when you have two mechanics that look the same and they're at the same time. Take note of those. Lesson number 4, greed less. I am very guilty of this. I have DPS brains sometimes, and I like to see big numbers and perform competitively. I never do this at the detriment of my raid team, but there are times when I play a bit fast and loose with my own survivability. Can't say I'll stop doing this entirely, but I need to at least recognize when I do this and take preventative measures if this is causing problems. Lesson number 5, come to raid well rested. Out of anything, this one can feel impossible for me at times. I work 50 plus hours a week, my kid is up at 6:30 every morning, I burn the candle on both ends, but it does have a direct effect on my raid performance. If I'm well rested, I'm more alert and I just play better. I can't guarantee I'm going to be able to do this, but I'd like to try to at least rest more. Speaking of things I'd like to do more, we have lesson 6, play the game more. Season 3 of The War Within has been a weird one. I was slamming Mythic Plus every single week up until the turbo boost. I haven't touched it since. My gear was capped and I had no reason to engage with that content anymore. I was more than happy to raid log. While it is the eventual outcome of every season, I find my performance in raid is directly tied to my time spent playing the game. The more I play, the better I perform. And lesson 7, forgive myself for mistakes. I can be very hard on myself, and I know a lot of you guys can too. Nobody likes to make mistakes, and I'm not the exception here. I take pride in my ability to play the game well, but I do mess up. The best thing for me that I can do is I collect myself, note down what I died to, but also why I died, and then move on. The important thing here is learning from those mistakes and trying to do better each and every time. Be kind to yourself. So those are my lessons, and I want to touch on 2 last things here. So first one is let's talk about overall parse performance. So right now we have a total of 3 more raids before pre-patch. Currently sitting at a 99.2% overall, and my goal is to push both Naazindhri and Dimensius up into that 99 bracket and get it to roughly about a 99.5% overall. I finished Nerebar Palace at 99.8 and Liberation of Undermine at 99.6. So if I can get close to those numbers, I think I'll be satisfied. And then the other thing I wanted to touch on is what's my main goal for next year? I have all these lessons, I'm going to try to improve, but I think first and foremost, I want to play well during progression. Most of us don't play this game for farm. Farm is fine, but really the fun part is learning and growing and doing boss encounters. I want to excel there. And then my secondary goal is I'm going to aim for my 99.5% parse overall. One of the things I've also done on the side is I do try and keep a death rate tracker, and I want to keep mine sub 5%. I'll show it here on the screen, but this is somewhat of an arbitrary calculation, but I try to keep tabs on my in-raid performance. It helps keep me accountable and it lets me learn from my mistakes. So if I'm able to be sub 5%, it's going to be relatively in alignment with past performances, and it gives me a barometer to evaluate my performance. So there you have it. That's been my performance review for Manaforge Omega. This is a little bit different from the normal Retribution specific content I've done, but if you've liked this or found this valuable, let me know in the comments below. If not, let me know too. For those who do want to support what I do here, I did recently launch a Patreon. It's got some cool extra stuff in there. If you want to support more, go check it out. The link is in the description. And as always, thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.